Okay, everyone. Well, hello and welcome to another installment of this limited series where we're collaborating on the ledger with FWB. We're talking a lot about creative custody. Today, we're talking to Anna Bulbrook, and I will do a quick try to kind of highlight some of her accomplishments. First and foremost, she's a violinist, a professional violinist. You've heard her in her band Airborne Toxic Event, and then on lots of other things. And my favorite is Lemonade by Beyonce. So that was like a pretty fun thing to learn about you. Also, founder of many cool projects like Gxrlschool, co-founder at Metalabel, and most recently, she's, let's see, let me make sure I get this exactly right, music and performance curation at TED, which is super exciting, and hope we get to talk about that a little later. So thank you for coming and welcome. It's awesome to finally meet you.
Thank you. That was perfect. I have no notes. 10 out of 10.
Great. So I guess I would love to start just from a place of curiosity of like, when did you start playing the violin, and like how does one like foray that into playing on some of the kind of like some of the most popular music product like productions of our past generation?
I think I started playing when I was 4. My older brother played, and I have his classic little sister, wanted to do what he did. And then it kind of became our thing. And I think in our family, our parents just really invested in it. Like some families had a ski home, some families did soccer practice. We did violin, like some people skateboard. And that was kind of our thing. And at a certain point, you're so in it. Um, like it took me around the world before I was graduated from high school. Like when I went to college, I made the kind of painful but like very telling decision to go to a liberal arts school instead of conservatory. But I still practiced and played really seriously through college. And then it was like in college, I think, when I started playing with a screamo band and was playing in like the crazy new music scene in New York and in the screamo band. And at the end of college, um, I threw this big intersectional, like interdisciplinary art party, and I think I thought I'd found my calling. So I quit playing violin, moved to California by accident, like really had this painful ego identity death that happened, not an ego death, an identity death that came with just not being this person that I'd really been for my whole life. And then it was like this cool process of like becoming de-orthodoxed, deprogrammed, unorthodox, just kind of like moving away from that classical music orthodoxy. And I fell in love with indie rock here. And there was like a crazy moment of indie rock that was happening in LA in like 2005 to 2010. And then, out of nowhere, some friends called and said, "Do you want to come play with this guy? He's this cool rapper named Kanye West. We're all playing with him on the side of a mountain in Colorado." And I was like, yeah, I'll do that. And then it sounds so simple now when I look at it, but I just stood behind him playing violin, looking at this mountainside, and suddenly was like, "Oh, this has value. This is a thing. You can play violin like this, and it matters. It doesn't have to look like concerto, the hardest thing on earth, on a stage like this. You can play whole notes behind a rapper. You could play whole notes by yourself, and it could be transcendent, and this really incredible exchange of energy with a group of people who want to be present together in a moment." So I just fully reprogrammed my brain. I joined a band a couple days later, and then that's what I did for like the next decade, basically, from 23 to
I find that
33.
like artistically, creatively is so interesting because what is the word you said? You said unorthodox. And
Deprogramming or yeah.
yeah, but I mean, what you mean is that is it accurate to say I mean you obviously as you grew up, it was about like playing better, playing harder, playing more difficult, playing like sort of going deeper in that vector, and then you found some other vector to travel down, like an emotional vector, a social vector, like what is it?
I think the values that I imbibed in classical music, I got an incredible technical education, and I understood, I learned so much from the process of training like that as a kid. You learn how to communicate, you learn how to give and receive really brutal constructive feedback in a small environment. You learn how to pull your weight in a large group. You learn how to be watertight. You learn all this cool shit. But what I didn't learn was, I think the other thing I imbibed was that it had to be hard, and it had to be hyper specifically hard to be worthwhile or good. And I think the challenge in pop music isn't necessarily how technical or how perfect you can be. It's how much you can translate a feeling and channel a moment that someone else can connect to. So like some of my favorite players are, the least technical, and some of my least favorite players are the most technical. And it's not that everyone technical is bad. It's about taste and connection over taste, connection, and does what you're saying and making matter to people? Do they connect with you? Are they getting an emotional gestalt out of it? As opposed to, to achieve that, you also have to play a note perfect Brahms violin concerto, or you're fucked. That's the only way. So I think, yeah.
No, I always remind people that nobody really thought that Kurt Cobain was the best guitar player that had ever walked the earth. Right? He was not Yngwie Malmsteen. He was he connected with people in a very, very different way that talks about that connects with what you're saying. What's interesting though, you did say you learned a bunch of cool stuff there, but the stuff you mentioned, I would argue is more about like discipline and practice maybe than cool stuff. So it makes sense to me that discipline and practice would translate into other parts of your life. I think practice really is something that I keep coming back to. I think one of the things that I've noticed more as I've gotten older is you are what you do. When I went to Beeple's studio and saw the room that's dedicated to everydays, what I really saw was a room that was dedicated to practice. It's almost like a shrine to practice. Is there a part of that you learned as a classically trained musician?
Yes. I spent hours practicing every day since maybe not hours when I was 4, but when you have this reservoir of discipline, it's kind of like this spear that you can point at anything. It's also maybe something that could get you into trouble if you have that hyper focus and that energy. I kind of sometimes compare it to being like a German Shepherd, where you need a hard day of work on the farm so that you can lie by the fire and not chew the furniture. But when I point that at whatever it is, like sometimes it's running, sometimes it's triathlon, and the rest of the time it's whatever I'm creatively trying to bring into being, it's like a very powerful resource and tool. It's like having a little engine. And I also think like learning how to break things into pieces and put them together as like this sort of like extreme discipline of understanding how to learn and understanding how to make impossible things possible for you is just that was one of the greatest gifts, I think, is just knowing that you can acquire new understandings and new skills because you practiced it forever. Like that feels like one of the great gifts I walked away with also.
So I guess what I was wondering then is like you had this moment of, figuring out that you could kind of parlay that practice and that skill into something totally different after the kind of Kanye moment. And then, I guess and then I think through to like your current title, right, which is, a curator. And so when I was reading about you and your trajectory, like I was really curious, like what the framework you use to kind of like curate your life and your career, right? Like how do you make that next decision path? Like what's the next cool project to work on? Like when are you going to get involved into something like Gxrlschool or Metalabel, right? Like what's the framework that you have to say like, this is cool and like worth me putting that practice and effort into?
I wish I had a really sexy answer for you, but I feel like all my best decisions have come from a place, basically like a place of deep knowing, and I don't know why. I had a feeling I should play with Airborne. We went on to get a gold record. I had a feeling I just liked Edward Sharpe's demos, and so I chose to record on that album without ever talking about money. And that first record that Edward Sharpe did, and it went on to be a platinum record. Like it's just, I had a feeling I should work with Yancey. I also know Yancey pretty well, and I have a good sort of, I think I have a good sort of sense of who I think is brilliant enough and also has that sort of disciplined spear and is strategic enough to get things accomplished. Like, I think I kind of have a good sort of like personal A&R meter for who to bank on and who I want to learn from. And I always, I don't know. I feel like when I can see something, it almost always happens, even if it feels like a long shot. But I have to be able to clearly see it. And it's not like I can clearly see everything all the time. It's like, but on these moments of inspiration or just understanding, I can make really strange things, or I can kind of find a vein into or a path into things that shouldn't happening.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say that in hip hop, we call that real, recognize real. But I also think that you're probably one of the people that actually makes things happen. As you said earlier, I always use this example. You mentioned triathlons, but like running a marathon is one of those things that, like, even running a 10K for someone that says, oh, I could never do that, and then they do that, then some trigger happens in your brain where you go, well, wait, what's the other stuff that I think I can't do that I can probably do? And then you realize, as you said earlier, if you practice your way through it, you probably can do it. But also, what I'm hearing you say is that when you show up to something, you show up because you've had some kind of flash of inspiration about it, but then you probably put in the practice it takes to get it across the line. But to fill in the blanks on the question, like, we covered the beginning, and you mentioned, a few of the things, including Metalabel. And if people would like to know more about Metalabel, Yancey and I did a podcast a few months ago where he explains what it is. So we don't need to cover it in depth, but like, give us, I'm curious to hear a bit more of that arc, between recording and touring, and then working with a group of people on a startup, which is a very different endeavor, so I'm curious, like, what that is, how do you find it, and what do you prefer?
I mean, I think bands and startups have a lot in common. To me, startups are actually a lot more rational because you're starting with, in this case, I joined Metalabel pre-seed. We did a seed round, and you're starting with so many more resources than you have in music. You're ideally making something useful for people, a tool potentially that they could use in their lives that maybe solves a problem for them, which is a lot more rational than making music that their only utility for someone to consume your music is because they like it. It means something to them. No one's going to buy your music because, they need help playing music at meetings or something. It's like, I don't, it's like, there's no like sort of utility to music beyond, I just connect with it and I want to experience it, outside of like situations like film and TV where music tells you how to feel all the time and has like a really specific job. But so to me, a startup was kind of like the rational band, and joining the idea that you move from idea to reality, that's natural to me. I've lived multiple impossible dreams. So, joining a startup with a couple very proven, successful co-founders felt safe, I would say, comparatively to how I've lived most of my life.
I just want to be on record as saying that is an absolute demonstration of everything is relative. Because what I tell my teams is that startups are roller coasters, and if you don't like riding roller coasters, don't get on a roller coaster. And really working at a big company is like being on a cruise ship, and some people love cruise ships. And if what you love is cruise ships and not roller coasters, don't work at a startup. Right now, what you're showing us though is that relative to being in a band or being a musician, a professional musician, that a startup is actually like a steady paycheck. Holy shit.
Yeah, supreme stability at a startup.
Yeah, if you need something, you just go get
Comparatively.
it. Seriously, I mean, it was like a huge retraining for me of if you need something, go get it. If you instead of fitting your ambitions to your resources or like kind of toggling between trying to fit your ambitions to your resources, it was like set a strategy and then just say what resources you need. And I think that was a huge reprogramming. And I just kept being like, do people know how good they have it? Do you realize that you can just say, I want a market ledger like this, and you can just plop down millions of dollars and just do that? Like, that is just not how it is when you're running your own band startup. And, it's,
Because you don't have the resources.
you just, yeah, you don't have the resources till you have them, so it's, and I think, I was raised by an entrepreneur. My dad had his own small business. So my parents kind of were always like, you'll understand when you're the boss, like, don't just think like an employee. And I recognize that, like I had that big transition when I went from being a sideman in a band with a strong leader, to, I started my own little solo project, which led me to found this festival. And then I really felt all these things. I actually ended up just apologizing to our lead singer later, or more just sharing with him. Like, I thought I understood. I didn't. Now I understand better, I think, how you might have felt in certain situations. And I think it's just important to carry responsibility for yourself and for other people around you at some point in your life. I think it makes you a better teammate. I think it makes you, it makes you understand why decisions get made. Like, we used to have this joke in my band, like, what's the answer to 99.9% of questions? Like, why is this road torn up? Or who designed this way? Or why is this like that? And the answer is always money. It's like, there's probably just nobody had money to do it, I feel like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know where I'm really going with this, except to say, like, all these venture-backed startups getting to experiment and sandbox and try stuff, like, it is a luxury. Do not take it for granted. Enjoy it. Like, it's special.
Yeah, totally agree. And it isn't, and it doesn't go on forever. So as you experiment, learn from it. And it's like Zoe and I talk about, you either win or you learn. Those are the two potential outcomes. But yeah, I mean, it's it is 99% of everything is answered by, because people got to eat.
Yeah, money.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I have related to that, the you either win or you learn question. So I actually attempted being a startup founder myself in 2019, and I was playing with ideas around curation and in more specifically, like, how do we bring curation to the masses, right? So, and I was thinking about this in the context of, just the kind of chaos of all of the information that we have access to. And that's for everything from, music to movies to what do we read. And so I am a firm believer in, like, curation by trusted sources. And so I would argue that your new gig is to be a trusted source and curate things for TED. But I guess, to me, I always love, like, picking people's brains about, like, who their trusted curators are in the world. So I was curious, like, what you think about that kind of curation by trusted sources, in general, and, like, where that leads us, because I think we're at this moment, right, of kind of like mass choice, right? And we need to kind of zero in on what is good, right? But that's all relative, as we were just saying, right? Like, what music is good is the most subjective question. And so I don't know, I guess, now that you are at a place where you get to curate things, maybe more broadly, how do you think about that in your life? Who are your trusted sources? And then, like, what are you thinking about at TED now? Like, how do you even start to curate for that audience?
Two things. I'm going to come back to, like, what is curation anyway in a little bit. But for maybe getting into trusted sources, I should first talk about what I feel about curation, which is, there's, like, art world curation, which has a specific sort of, like, intellectual and historical relationship to the work that's being presented, and it really is sort of like a specific field. And then there's what I do, which I think is closer almost in a way to cultural producing or creative producing. And I think it comes with a fair amount of responsibility, especially with a global platform like TED, which has, an audience of 110 million worldwide. And it's watched by everybody. So when it comes to sort of the music and performance programming, or the people who might do something we call a performa talk, which is a performance and some sharing. I think both about what I think the world will receive, but also understanding that my taste is a little bit in service of this broader audience. And so if I want to bring in something that might be a little bit spicier or more left of center, I need to contextualize it and find a way in so that anyone, like I almost think about like a wedding, like your old conservative grandma and your cool cousin and like, you know, your little brother and your dad are all at this wedding, and they all need to find a way into this performance or this content. And so yeah, I think it's equal parts like trying to broaden my view. And the only way I think you can broaden your view is by having a pretty diverse group of trusted sources in your life. And for me, that's literally making friends with lots of different kinds of people and understanding that I don't have context. I cannot personally have context in which to make decisions in most genres of things and most communities. So I almost feel like an aggregator of lots of people's inputs from their own lived understanding and really intimate experience of their community and their lens on culture. And, you know, if I can be like a ladder towards laddering things into this like larger context, then amazing. So I do feel like curation is a group project, and I don't want to take, you know, I can't personally take credit for all by myself making every decision I've ever made, because I think it really is like a cultural mesh network. And I think to be a responsible curator, you do need to have more inputs than just you, especially when curating for something like the TED stage, which really can launch careers, and it really can, you know, I mean, it is this pantheon of ideas and people and resources. And I think that comes with responsibility to not just put like, say, you know, white ladies up there, or all one style, or just world music. Like, I think there's, you know, there's so many things that, yeah, there's a lot to include, and a small, you know, like a very small aperture that everything has to kind of flow through. Not that many opportunities to put things on that stage.
Well, in other words, as a curator, you're serving that audience.
You're serving the audience, and you're filtering, really.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it's also framing, like kind of filtering your trusted sources, and then framing things so people can understand and really connect. But I also think that the world is so curated. There's literally like a playlist at the vet for calming songs for the dog. It's like, here's your curated playlist. So I also think that there's like a place where like curation and the world community have all kind of just like jumped the shark in a big way.
That's why I think the word trusted that Zoe uses is so important, right? There's curation, and then there's your trusted curators, because there are a lot of people that would, you know, we've all seen, you know, the record labels all have their own playlist companies. Wonder which songs they're going to recommend to me. So you know, the trusted curators are maybe, you know, few in number and insanely valuable
and personal, right? You know, like and like self-selected, right? Like my trusted sources of interesting shit are not going to be the same as either of yours, and that's so you have to curate your curators first, and then you get good curation. Is that, I think, how it goes?
Well, and that was I always come back to Umer Haq, 2004, the Blockbuster versus the Snowball, and he talked about how, you know, pre-web marketing was hyper efficient and quality would deliver diminishing returns, but post-web, you know, quality is hyper efficient, but quality gets interpreted as quality that you grew up with, Anna, in classical music, right? This sort of like absolute point out there that everyone is supposed to be driving toward, when in reality, as Zoe just said, quality really means tier one to me. And that's the, you know, that's where it gets really individual. And actually, you know, ChatGPT, when I say, hey, make me a playlist of running songs, 80 beats per minute, no songs from the Billboard Top 100, you know, ultimately it'll get pretty damn good at it. But that's another topic.
So, Ian, I would say, am I sensing a follow-up conversation where we just talk about endurance sports? Because I'm in for that one.
Zoe could be in for that one too. Zoe and I ran the San Francisco Marathon together. So
Oh, amazing. Okay, more on that.
yeah, yeah. Well, by the way, that's also my TED talk, although it does involve that I haven't done, but it involves skateboarding. So I'm sensing we're getting closer spiritually, metaphysically to that one as well. But talking about technology, I wanted to come to Metalabel and the kind of this talk of creative custody, as Zoe mentioned at the beginning, completely, because I'm really curious to get into how you think technology has impacted and I think at Metalabel you were really in the business of talking to people how creative endeavors in the future might be different as collaborations between individuals. So I'm really interested to get your take on maybe you could tell the audience exactly what you did at Metalabel. I'm going to generalize and say that you mentioned Metalabel building useful things for the creative class, and I think I always summarize those two things as one, a packaging format for media. We don't have album packages anymore. Well, you do actually, but you have to go to the record store to buy them. But we don't have them in our digital music. But you guys were building packaging formats so a digital album or magazine or collection of media could be packaged together into a package that could be opened the way that, say, a sealed pack of baseball cards or a sealed piece of vinyl could be opened. That was one thing. And the other is that I always like about Metalabel and in my conversations with Yancey, it's that there's this acknowledgement that creative endeavors are usually done by a collection of people, but oftentimes the overhead of kind of formalizing that collection of people is, like you and I make a 4-song EP together. What are we going to do? Go form an LLC and get a distributor and who knows what happens. Whereas you guys put on chain the kind of the downstream of those royalties. So you could correct me if I've misinterpreted what Metalabel is, but I'm also curious for you, like, why is that interesting to you? What did you find kind of the reaction to that to be? Because if I'm correct, your job was to try to convince people of these ideas, right? So I'm interested in what convinced you, and what did you find when you tried to convince other people, and as a result, what do you believe the future is here?
So my initial conversations with Yancey were really, he would just call me to ask, is Gxrlschool a Metalabel? Do you see this framework applying to you? It was almost just friendly market research, or just kind of stress testing this framework against me and some other people. And I was interested because I thought, this is how I live my life. Gxrlschool was sort of like maybe like a sole proprietorship that drew from a deep well of community. It was all collaborative, even though I was sort of the person.
Tell people briefly what Gxrlschool is.
So Gxrlschool is an intersectional feminist festival that turned into a cultural programming studio, creative studio. So we did projects initially. I mean, it just started as a little local festival. By our third year, we had Fiona Apple singing with Shirley Manson from Garbage, with an all-women identified choir and ensemble in front of 600 people in this tiny club here. And then, Fiona trended on Twitter on Super Bowl Sunday because she called out the president of the Grammys for his remarks that women need to step it up to get more Grammys. We had Karen O sing with a band of children. Some of those children are now the Linda Lindas. We had everybody from Phoebe Bridgers to LaKaylee 47 in this 500 person club in those 3 years. And it was a pretty amazing run. So, I met Yancey actually through his wife, and we all became friends. And so we would talk that way. And so as the project was kind of coming together, partly my A&R spidey sense went off, and I was like, I think this has energy. This matters to me. I'm really curious what it feels like. So if I can impact culture in LA and strongly, but in this little sort of microcosm, what would it be like to try to make a bigger impact, more at scale, and share this way of doing things that has shaped my life? I've only really been part of collaborative projects, whether I've been a sideman or the leader or whatever. And what would that look like to kind of bring that capability to other people. And I really joined the Web3 space kind of during like the most feverish height of the bull market, when everybody was tokenizing. Conventional wisdom was everyone tokenize, figure out the legal stuff later. And I think like in the space of the first 3 months that I was kind of in the world, it all drastically shifted. So Metalabel is creating a framework and tooling for creative people to capitalize on their work online. And I think importantly, also creating the rails for people to collaborate more seamlessly and efficiently. And I think the other part of this equation is it's allowing people to release work in a much more sort of intermedia, cross-disciplinary way, which feels a lot more true to how people actually make and do things. Like I don't know anyone who's only, I mean, I guess I know a couple people who are only painters, for example, or only writers, but I think it's much more common for people to be in communities where you have a large group of different kinds of creative people and they're all friends and they all hang out together. And
Yeah, it's funny. I've mentioned this before, and I apologize to the audience if I'm repeating myself, but I completely agree, and it's why I actually get a little. I always pause when someone wants to pitch me an idea, which is like Web3 music or Web3 fashion, or because I just sort of, part of my feeling is that those are very much distribution terms more than they're artistic terms, right? If it comes on a silver plastic disc and holds 72 minutes of music, then it goes in the music store. And if it hangs on a coat rack, then it goes into the clothing store. But artists always want to transcend those boundaries. I mean, the very first time I met Kanye, he told me that music was a box and he had to get out of the box, right? And so I love that it's like very much interdisciplinary, because it just feels like that's an opportunity that kind of this medium, the kind of dematerialized and easily distributed. I'm purposefully avoiding using the word digital to use something more specific, gives us. So I love that too. I love that kind of acknowledgement.
yeah, it feels a little bit like if you give people an opportunity. I mean, there's lots of different tools available. And if you want to release a record by yourself tomorrow, use Bandcamp. It's all set up. Distribution's really easy. But I think if you're thinking more broadly, or you want to collaborate a little differently, or, maybe, yeah, I think if you're thinking more broadly about how you create, and you maybe want to be in a more sort of direct delivery system, like I almost view Metalabel as a delivery system for culture, but I don't know that that's sort of like our goal. I don't know that's like language anyone else would use. But it really does feel like a cultural delivery system to me that allows the people delivering the culture a little more flexibility and freedom. And I think if you build it, they'll come. If you make Instagram, you'll get influenzas. If you make, you'll get other things too, but like, you build something and you get a cottage industry that is able to thrive because the conditions have been set. So I think we're trying, at Metalabel, we were trying to set the conditions for collaboration and just more creative stuff to happen, and with more of a feeling of holding hands than being alone in the void.
Okay, and now zooming away from that, from Metalabel specifically, and kind of back to Anna, the creative person. We're early in that transition, right? Like Metalabel is a brand new thing and relatively unknown and relatively unused, and et cetera, et cetera. So, obviously I'm a believer in that comes as well, but I think it takes a long time. But what's your feeling, having kind of lived and breathed it, in startup land for a bit of time, and being a creative person and living and working in a creative community where I'm sure it runs the spectrum of people who are like, wow, that sounds really cool, to I think it's all a scam. Like where are we, and where do we go from here?
I mean, I've worked with everyone from Holly Herndon, who I brought to TED last year, to artists who just really fucking hate crypto. And I think that I think it's like a very different place to come from when you primarily lived and worked as an artist for so long. I feel like my deepest allegiance is to creative people. and I'm sort of a hoe for whatever tooling, sort of resourcing, delivery systems serve the creative good and serve the project and serve the audience. So for me, all of technology is just, it's a little bit like this opportunistic space where it's all an beautiful intermediary. And if something works, great. And if it doesn't work, I don't know. So I think the digital space or Web3 space, whatever, can work really beautifully for certain things. And I'm watching incredible projects happen, like what Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst do, or what the duo Operator do, is really a lot of the times completely enabled by the availability of blockchain, and they're using it as like a palette to play with. And then there's other stuff where, you know, maybe it doesn't make sense for a painter to drop an NFT collection because they don't have a digital audience. It won't really serve them. You know, like maybe they should be a late adopter. So I think that there's a spectrum, and for me, like the project of collaboration is bigger than the story of just crypto or one technology. I mean, I feel like collaboration is one of our greatest technologies, you know, like it really is its own technology. So I got a little lost there in the weeds, but to me, it feels like it's really available for some people, and it's really like sort of the blockchain angle on creativity is like very still opaque for some people, and like that's okay. Not every tool is for every person at this time, you know, like that it needs to be okay. And yeah, I guess that's how I kind of feel about it.
I have
Do you have a million thoughts?
well, no, and I wanted to, I was kind of tying it together with what you said about Bandcamp earlier in my head, right? Because I was thinking about Metalabel versus Bandcamp conceptually, right? Not as two brands, but also I think the fact that, you know, I remember when Bandcamp started, would have been, I'm going to go with 2008, 2007, 2008. If you think about, you know, how long a journey that was, I think that should be a reminder to people in the space to go from, you know, only being for bands that you've never heard of to being like the way that I find out that there's a new album on Matador or 4AD or Sub Pop. Wow, I didn't imagine that that's, you know, what would take place. I do really see a place for digital collectibles on Bandcamp. I wish they were there personally, right? Because I can listen to the songs for free, or I can buy the digital download, which I often do actually, or I can buy the vinyl, which I often do. Or but if I could collect, you know, something that shows I'm a fan of this band, there's many times that I would do it, even if it's in kind of a cheap and templatized way, because, you know, as a fan of music, I love showing my support for the band, right? But then, you know, with what Metalabel is doing, it seems like kind of a level up in terms of a bigger package, a bigger project, maybe a different kind of collaboration, a collaboration that couldn't have happened. And that to me gets to more of what you're saying. I love the notion that collaboration is itself an innovation, and also, you know, the notion that technology is really a tool. You know, people talk about technology as something that's good or bad, and I always say, is fire good or bad, right? You know, it depends on how you use it. You know, a brick can build a house or break a window, and you know, we could, if there's a new tool for collaboration, I'm sure we could use it for good, and I'm sure we could use it for evil. You know, so I was just thinking about, you know, I guess it was a very specific question for you within this is, you know, I do predict, and tell me if you disagree, that over time, you know, more creative people will see the value in many of these tools, as opposed to kind of the casino and the scammy and the get rich quick. What's your take on how that might happen in the artist community?
I mean, I think the early adopters have found ways to make hay, and so it's happening, but I would still call that a bit of like the fringe culturally. I think the other funny thing is, when you're talking about creative people or artists, there's musicians, there's visual artists, there's poets and writers, there's performance artists. So I think certain classes of creator are extra empowered by the digital space, particularly movement-based or time-based work, I think is empowered in a way that it's been hard. I mean, even before we really had ubiquitous video, we couldn't really like capture and translate performance art, so like Marina Abramovich, the giant, like she was really empowered by the advent of like the VHS camera even, so I mean, she's one of the first people to sort of film performance art and package it up and sort of get that ball rolling. So I think different classes of people are going to adopt it when it serves them. I do think a lot of creative people are running on such thin margins that that still for a large group of people, they're going to want resources that maintain predictable value for a while. So I think as long as, I think people are pretty adventurous when they think there's an opportunity, but they also have such limited resources anyway. They're always scrambling to try to raise money to make stuff or try things, that it's just going to have to be a little more consistently a win before it gets more widely adopted. I think it's just going to have to be a little less friction forward. I think onboarding is still complicated. I think things like Ledger make it easier to hold your assets and whatnot, but I think even kind of understanding the language of what all this stuff is challenging for people whose primary job isn't to understand their finances. It's to make creative work, listen to birdsong and make a painting. I don't know, so I think it's just going to be a journey, and I think there are going to be surprising outcomes. Strange groups of people are going to prosper and we don't even know yet, and other people are going to never figure it out.
Yeah.
It also feels like, I completely agree with you. You need more time on the clock because things have to get easier to use. I always remind people, I can't remember the dates. I used to have them in my head and now I've forgotten, but the distance between the invention of moving pictures by, the Lumiere brothers or whomever it was, and then the first short film, it was like 25 years or something. And I love that this notion that like what we consider to be like story through moving pictures, it took 25 years of kind of this novelty of the invention before we got there. So I think that's always a process as well. And then I think also to your point, like you just need leaders. There were no double albums before Blonde on Blonde, and after Blonde on Blonde, there were a lot of double albums. It's like sometimes you need a trailblazer, to light the path and to make some mistakes in front of you so you know what not to do. And I'm sure that just like with the internet, the same thing will happen here. I always remind people that in 1995. The company that I worked for put the first, URL on a movie poster, but we didn't try to get you to watch the movie online. That came many, many, many years later, and a lot of people telling us it was never, ever, ever going to happen along the way. So I'm sure this space will be no different. But I do think that like the connection between all of your projects and the ethos of what we're doing here is this like direct connection. I feel like you said it earlier, where this connection between an artist and a consumer. What I always said in music is, I would say this to music business crowds, that there are two people in the music business who matter: people who make music and people who love music, and all the rest of us are in the way. But there are these tools that can provide value along that, but we have to build them, and that it takes a long time. They don't materialize out of thin air.
Well, and I do think that one like interesting thing right now, and just in general, like when we're thinking of like what is the next utility that gets built on chain, right? Like we do have to kind of wade through the PR mess that has been created by the casino, right? And so I think the other thing is going to be like, what are the utilities that people find, that they use every day and that like it meaningfully improves their life or their ability to connect with things that they're fans of, or build trusted institutions or whatever it is, right? And we haven't kind of found those killer use cases yet, but I do think there is a deficit to wade through at the moment. And so it'll be interesting to see kind of like what the things that get built are, like how they connect to people, right? Because I think that is a big thing that's missing in a lot of these projects is like what's the big like life change that it's going to bring to me, and like how's it going to get me closer? Maybe it's, figuring out the distribution of assets among collaborators, and maybe it's identity and health record, right? Like we don't really know what the killer use case is going to be yet, but I do think it's super super interesting to see kind of like how you weave your way back into something where you're like reclaiming trust in this thing that's a little rocky right now.
I mean, some people are super turned on by experimenting with the new thing and figuring it out and surfing the future. I feel like maybe, Ian, you're kind of in that class of like always wanting to be on the forward edge. And some people want to know what they're getting into because they're busy thinking about other things and it's just a tool for them. And I think like that whole spectrum, like for a huge shift to happen, you have to have the group of people that are just like, all right, cool, I can use this now. I got it. Like I'm willing to adopt a new thing now, because I'm pretty sure the value prop is there for me. And I think that's like, yeah, I think a lot of creative people are probably closer to the caboose of that train than the conductor. But there are some incredible people up there fucking conducting and like driving that train forward, maybe off a cliff. Who's to say, maybe it's like the super financialized, like casino people are driving the train off the cliff and the creative people are like trying to keep it on track toward into the wilderness or something. I don't know. This metaphor is like a little wacky, but I think it's going to be a minute before the caboose, follows, but that's okay. Like this is like, where are we in this the valley, after the height of the excitement, and now you have the uncanny valley or whatever it's called, like,
Valley of disillusionment.
The valley of disillusionment. Are we at 1 of 20 years, or are we like 5 years in? Are we where do you think we are in this valley of disillusionment?
Well, I think for me, I always remind people that, I started building digital music apps in the early 90s, 91, and then we launched Apple Music in 2015. So that's I know that it takes a long time. And, in 1999, the internet was never going to scale because everyone's never going to have broadband. And in 2008, everyone's never going to have a smartphone. And then, in 2017, you've got 6 billion smartphones on the planet, or maybe 5 billion at that point. But today that number is getting close to 7 billion smartphones out of 8 billion people. So, it happens in total, but it does take a long time. And it takes a lot of building and a lot of adoption. And you're right, there are some of us that are want to be there day one because we see the promise and we overinvest and we create a bubble and we, and because we're so excited and so convinced. And then there are a lot of people that, as Zoe's saying, we really need to prove the value to, and they come over time when it really has meaning in their life. But, from my perspective, we have this new thing, and it's not just digital value, it's digital stuff. And just like a lot of the things in our life, might have a lot of monetary value, but they have meaning to us anyway. I think digital stuff will be that pervasive in our lives, and we'll have, digital mechanisms of exchange for all kinds of value, and including art. But maybe that's a good lead into our final questions that we ask everyone. Zoe, maybe let's save the bonus question for the end because the lead-in is so perfect. Like we use this term creative custody, but when we started, Zoe and Ariel and I looked at each other and we're like, wait, what do we even mean by this? But what does creative custody mean to you, Anna?
So I had a minute to marinate on this, and I was like, is it cultural preservation, like institutions, libraries, museums, like literal edifices, history books? Is it stewardship, like what gets culturally programmed, celebrated, fostered? Like what's that proactive creation of culture? Is it like holding and maintaining something, like this active present thing of holding? Like is that custody, with the possible intention of passing it on to someone else? And then I feel like my whole interpretation of custody is flavored by growing up as a violinist. And in the violin world, you get these precious instruments that are hundreds of years old that other people have played, people beyond you will play. I was like 13 with like, $200,000 strapped to my back, just being sent into Boston to go to music school. And you take care of this precious thing. It's cared for by being played. It's cared for by, people, collectors collect multi-million-dollar instruments and lend them to like young players so that they can be, maintained and cared for. And so I guess to me, it kind of feels like this, coming from that perspective, custody feels like if you really value something and it's part of a lineage, like how do you care for it with the intention of passing it on? It's not just for me to have and then consume and then that's it. It is kind of this longer trajectory. So I guess that will be my interpretation of it.
I love that. Partly because I believe blockchains will outlive humans, and I think that will actually work in that way. So it's both spiritually and technically sound from my perspective. Zoe, you want to ask the number 2, or you want me to do it?
I'll ask a question. I guess the question that I want to ask is, what's a technology that you think will exist, say in 10 or 20 years, that is really difficult to imagine today, or something that will just be obvious, kind of like the smartphone in our pocket is now obvious, but was a pipe dream in 2008?
I think, do you have like a Alexa or like a Google Assistant or Siri? Mm-hmm. Do you use any of these things?
Yeah, it's very funny. When I activate ours, it makes like a little beeping sound in the Sonos in my 1-year-old's room. And if I say the keywords, which I refuse to say right now, she goes and looks up to the ceiling to hear the smart speaker. So like she definitely thinks that's God in our house right now. So yes. So we unfortunately have those.
I had to move my Google Assistant out of my house and into my office because I got so used to just asking it what time it was, like all the time, that I would be outside walking down the street and just want to be like, hey, what time is it? Hey, Google, what time is it? Like I mostly asked it to time things, set a timer, and what time is it, so I could just not have to look at something.
It's about what it was good at this point in technology as well.
I know, incredibly useful though, incredibly useful to just always not have to look at a clock. And then I just had this feeling of like, I just want to ask the ether any question. So I feel like this omniscient AI fueled cloud, like if we think we have Starlink now, just imagine Starlink, but with like, enhanced Alexa capabilities, but like better,
Yeah, the combination of Starlink, which means high-speed internet anywhere on the planet, mm-hmm. plus
the world's biggest cloud,
voice, mm-hmm. plus
ChatGPT,
ChatGPT 25, mm-hmm. Which hopefully has answers which are factual.
Yeah, hallucinates less.
But yes, I plus Apple goggles.
Yeah.
Magic
Vision
Leap,
Pro.
Magic Leap can play next in this stage play, and Apple can
basically
be Apple.
like everything that Black Mirror imagines, I feel could be true.
Yeah,
I think Black Mirror is the Oracle, really.
Yeah.
We're all just riding that train, hopefully not off a cliff, into Black Mirror.
Okay, so to wrap up, I just looked at the clock. Google didn't tell me. We have 2 more very, very important questions for you.
Okay.
The first one is, as a person that's had, as you said, like the circuitous career. I don't know.
My quotes of my career is actually, I don't know if you would call appropriate.
That's what I would say about my own. So I apologize if I'm putting you in that same.
No, I fuck with it.
That same bucket. But you definitely like there are many people and people who listen to this podcast that would love to move kind of from whatever it is they're doing into the world of crypto, blockchain, Web3. What advice would you give somebody who wanted to do that but didn't quite know how to make the leap?
I mean, I had such a handheld entry. I would say find a friend who's really into it and take baby steps. Do things that are predictable and on the safer side. Don't do any trading anyone's ever recommended to you on Instagram. I think it would be find someone who's really in the community, kind of like your crypto Sherpa, someone you like, who's getting value out of it, and maybe make a friend and hold hands on the way in. I think that I had a bunch of people looking out for me, and I still made some like pretty amazing, hilarious mistakes, and felt overwhelmed a lot. There's a lot of new language. There's a lot of new ways of thinking about things. I think having a friend you can call, you know, and bounce things off of, or who can kind of lead the way for you, is having a trusted source would be the way in, I would say.
Full
Bring-
circle.
to bring it
So
all
in
full
other words,
circle.
call Anna. She's gonna help. She's gonna help steward you through this. All right,
Yeah.
Zoe,
Yeah.
take us out.
Okay, last and probably most important question. What is the first concert you ever saw, and what is the most recent concert you ever saw?
Okay, probably the first concert I ever saw, I can't remember if it's Fiona Apple at the Orpheum in Boston, or if it was Rancid and Operation Ivy in Worcester, Massachusetts.
Oh man.
Wow.
Those were
So
my
Tim played in
two
both
first
bands?
concerts. I can't remember which one came first.
Wow. Okay.
Maybe it was Rancid. I loved both those seminal records as a youth, clearly. And then
Zoe and I saw Rancid together once at a wedding. Just saying. She was much younger then, and she did sing Spice Girls karaoke with Kathleen Hanna that night. But we'll tell that story another time.
I'm applauding if you can't hear it in my AirPods here.
My life is strange.
I believe you. I believe you.
That's a different podcast. We'll
Tim
interview
from
me
Rancid
on a
actually
different
has that on
podcast.
video. So Tim, if you hear this, I would love to have a copy of that video. Okay, and the most recent concert?
In the most recent concert on Friday, I went to see Shirley Manson and Noel Gallagher play the Greek. But I also went to see some poetry earlier this week. Aja Monet did her album release party with a jazz band, and it was spectacular. So I mean, it was just incredible. You know, it's just nice to see your homies shining, and Shirley's probably one of the best humans on earth, inside and out. So
Awesome. Thank you so much for doing this with us.
thank
It's
you.
been so fun.
And now we're going to do the performance.
love talking shit with you guys.
Athletics. We're doing performance athletics follow up.
Next
Yeah,
up, all
exactly.
endurance sports.
Yeah. Yeah.
This content is provided for informational purposes only and is the sole expression of our opinion and should not be relied upon as legal, business, investment, or tax advice. Do your own research. Any loss or profit is your sole responsibility. Stay safe.